Thank you very, very much. Thank you. The reason Gene said that all about me is I've been taking advice from him for 20 years, and I've learned a great deal from him. But we do share something in common, I think, with all the folks behind me, and I suspect most of you, that at the end of the day, you know, my dad used to have an expression. He said, Joey, a job's about a lot more than a paycheck, having lost his job and having moved from one city to another. He'd always say, it's about a lot more than your paycheck. It's about your dignity. That was his phrase, about your dignity. It's about your sense of yourself. It's about your self-respect. People behind me, they have an incredible amount of self-respect. And they deserve to be paid in a way that reflects the dignity that they exude. Folks, it's great to be here with Acting Secretary Seth Harris. As Gene said, Seth is not acting, man. He is doing one heck of a job, and I've enjoyed traveling around the country with him. He's first rate. He cares a lot, and I'm going to really miss Alan Krueger. Alan is sort of the class of the field. I know he's going back to Princeton, and it's lucky for them, but we're going to miss him, but he also knows that he's not going to get away. It's only a telephone call. Folks, before I start, I have to say that like so many across the country, I'm disappointed in the Supreme Court's decision today, you may or may not have heard of, in Shelby County versus Holder, the Voting Rights Act. The Voting Rights Act, the cornerstone of the American Civil Rights Movement, the thing that really got me engaged in politics as a young kid, got me to run for the United States Senate when I was 29 years old. That law, today's decision, upset a well-established practice. The Voting Rights Act has been repeatedly enacted by overwhelming bipartisan majorities in the Congress. For 17 years, I was chairman of, or the ranking member of, the Judiciary Committee. And every time it came up for reauthorization, we got support. If I'm not mistaken, the last time, Strom Thurmond voted to reauthorize it as well. No, I'm serious. So in 2006, it was reauthorized by unanimous support of the United States Senate and near unanimous support of the House of Representatives. And this support is based on a recognition that voting rights, voting is a fundamental right. It's the foundation of our democracy. The Voting Rights Act has been critical and an effective means to guarantee that core right. As the Supreme Court acknowledged, we've made progress as a nation. The Supreme Court also recognized voting discrimination still exists. Between 1982 and 2006, the Justice Department blocked 700 changes in local voting rules, 700 changes, based on their determination that the changes were designed to be discriminatory. They discriminated. In 2011, South Carolina passed a law requiring voters to show certain forms of ID at the polls. The Justice Department objected to the law. At the trial, showing that there were 60,000 black voters in the state who would have been denied the right to vote the day the law took effect. But folks, as we move forward, let's remember that not all the Voting Rights Act was struck down. The court, I won't go into the detail of the decision, but it says the Congress can pass new legislation. They struck down a section that talked about new regulations ensuring that every American has equal access to the polls. We're going to work with Congress in this effort, and the administration can do everything in our power to ensure fair and equal voting processes are maintained. So there's a lot of work that's going to have to be done, but it's nonetheless disappointing that the court made the decision it did. Now I want to move on to the reason why we're all here, and I apologize for everyone for moving to that first, but I want you to picture, and I know that Alan and Gene have spoken to you already, but I want you to picture an American kitchen table in the 1930s. I think of my Grandpa Finnegan's table in Scranton, Pennsylvania, for real. 5 kids, 1930. But go back and look at your grandparents and think of when they sat around the table, some of you with backgrounds not dissimilar to mine. There's several children sitting in exhausted silence, the light of childhood dimmed in their eyes from the long hours and dangerous work. They were working in a factory on a slag heap in Scranton. My family did not. There's a chair sitting empty because one of the parents is still at work, putting in a 16-hour day. And even though everyone in the family is working, there's not enough food around to go around to fill that table, fill people's stomachs. But there is hope. There was hope. On the mantle, there is a picture of President Franklin Roosevelt, who promised that he would do something to eliminate, in his words, child labor and long hours and starvation wages. That was his quote. So 1938, with the first female secretary in a cabinet, Frances Perkins, the Department of Labor, they acted. The Fair Labor Standard Act was passed. It outlawed oppressive child labor. It set a 40-hour work week, and it set a minimum wage of 25 cents per hour. Now, at the time, many said this would lead to job losses, and it was downright un-American. Seriously, listen to the rhetoric and see if it sounds familiar to you. In 1938, Senator Arthur Vandenberg said that this was what he called a fascist bill. Here's what he said. He said, "We are driven closer and ever closer to centralized authoritarianism, a centralized authoritarian state with its tyranny of oppressive government-blessed monopolies," end of quote. 7 decades later, we're still hearing the same kind of arguments. In 2007, Congressman Jeb Hensarling said, and I quote, "We can have either maximum opportunity or we can have minimum wages. We cannot have both." You know, it really doesn't matter that the GDP has grown 600% since that law was enacted. Every time we update the law, particularly the minimum wage, we're told it will be the death of the American economy. In 1955, Barry Goldwater said the rise of the minimum wage would mean, and I quote, "economic chaos for the very people we're trying to help." That's always the great argument. You all are going to be hurt by what we're going to do. That's sort of the key. In 80, when he said he was running for president, Ronald Reagan said the minimum wage has caused more misery and unemployment than anything since the Great Depression. In 1996, after Democrats voted to increase the minimum wage, Congressman Jack Kingston said, "Today the Democrats say goodbye to 500,000 jobs." By the way, that year after the wage increase went into effect, the economy added 3.4 million new jobs. Look, the fact is that numerous studies using methods like comparing experiences in counties right across the line, one county in one state, another county in another state, when one state raised the minimum wage and the other did not, they've shown that increasing the minimum wage has no negative impact on employment, none. Instead, it increases employers' ability to attract, retain, and motivate workers. And it benefits workers by increasing the reward to work. Businesses like Costco and StrideRite have supported past increases of the minimum wage because it's helped build strong and stable workforces and profitability over the long run. The opponents were wrong about the future in 1938, and they are wrong now in 2013. And so we're here today to celebrate the 75th anniversary of one of the greatest laws to ever come out of this country, in my view. But 75 years later, Republicans in the House seem to think that overtime is a luxury and is not mandated by the minimum wage, by the Fair Labor Standards Act, and that you can raise a family on today's minimum wage, $7.25 an hour. These people work hard. $7.25 an hour, $14,500 a year for a 40-hour week. It's not enough to make in today's world. It's not even enough to make it above the poverty level. Folks, it's time to raise the minimum wage and keep faith with the Fair Labor Standards Act. In his State of the Union message, the President asked for an increase in the minimum wage and to have it indexed to inflation. So don't keep having this fight over and over and over again. We're also talking about raising the minimum wage for tipped workers, as was mentioned. Many people don't realize that servers in restaurants are subject to lower minimum wage because they get tips. There's a logic to that. But their rate hasn't been increased for over 20 years. We're going to fix that. These proposed increases would raise wages for over 15 million people. Think of the impact that will have on the economy, on their economy, our economy. Put a little extra money in the hands of so many consumers. Think about what it means to a middle-class family. An increase would cover all that they are now spending on groceries. Just this increase. If we increase the minimum wage, just what we're talking about, all the money you spend on a year on groceries will be equal to that increase. It's like getting a free year of groceries. The same thing goes for all the gasoline you spend for 1 year, or 6 months of your housing cost. That's what it's like. That's what it means in terms of an average family on minimum wage. And raising the minimum wage doesn't just benefit the workers behind me. It creates a proven ripple effect that increases wages all the way up to scale. The 2011 study that was referred to by Gene of the Federal Reserve Bank in Chicago found that a $1 increase in minimum wage increases household spending in the following year by about $2,800, which stimulates economic growth in local communities. Some of the nation's leading economists, beyond Gene and Alan, Lauren Katz, Richard Freeman, Joseph Stiglitz, Laura Tyson, argued that, quote, low-wage workers spend their additional earnings, potentially raising demand and job growth. Therefore, pursuing higher minimum wage at this juncture will not only provide raises for low-wage workers, but provide some help that we need for the job front, on the job front as well. Folks, it's not like these are spendthrifts. It's not like, you know, when you say, well, these guys will go out and spend the raise. They spend the raise to try to make sure they got enough food on the table. They'll spend the raise to make sure that they can keep the heat up during the winter. They'll spend the raise to make sure that they can make it. They'd like to be able to save it, but they have to spend it to make it. But the effect is that ripples all through the economy. It doesn't just benefit them. This ripple effect, once a higher wage floor is set, workers higher up the chain are in a better position also to see their wages raised. And minimum wage workers are not able to keep up. The value of the federal minimum wage, which was already mentioned here, has decreased by 30% since 1968. In other words, all they're asking here is for just pay me minimum wage what you paid folks in 1968. Think of it in those terms. They're not asking a whole heck of a lot. In 1980 alone, increases in inflation eroded the 81 level by 27% by 1989. The jargon always used by a Republican president, only workers making the minimum wage are teenagers. How many times you hear the teenager? I used to, in the Senate, always hear this argument. Well, you know, they're just stocking shelves, these teenagers, and you're going to put the local hardware store out of business. And guess what he's going to do? He's not going to hire teenage workers, he or she. They're going to let them go, and so there'll be less employment. It's always here. Well, let's get the facts straight. 20%, only 20% of the people making the minimum wage are teenagers. The rest are hardworking adults, many of them with families, and I mean hardworking. Talk to a janitor who has to pay for his own uniform while earning the bare minimum wage with backbreaking work. Talk to the hardworking people who get behind me, gather here today. One other fact, about 60%, as was pointed out by Gene, because we both have a passion related to this, are making the minimum wage are women, a lot of them with children. It's about time we stop treating work in fields where women are the majority as less valuable than in male-dominated fields. Look, I have two brothers and a sister. I had the great pleasure of my mom living with me in her final years. Toward the end, my mom needed help. She broke her hip. And I'm down here, and my mom was too proud to move down here. She didn't want to move to the vice president's house. But she stayed home in my house. And so we were there all the time. My sister, God love her, my mom used to have an expression. It said, a son's a son till he gets a wife, a daughter's a daughter the rest of her life. Well, my sister is my closest friend, and my brother Jim, who lived in Philly, they were there all the time with Mom, and then I'd be home every weekend. I got a lot of criticism. Why'd Biden go home so much in the first 3 years? Well, I went home because my mom was home. Simple proposition, and I'm not that far away. But it turned out after she broke her hip, she needed some help. She didn't need a nurse, an RN, or even a practical nurse. She needed just somebody to sometimes help her get up in her walker, maybe unload the washing machine. My mother insisted on doing her wash, but when it's heavy, to put it out of the washer into the dryer, she needed a little bit of help. Didn't want to help, but she knew she needed it. And just make sure that there was some help making her meals. Well, let me tell you something. We went out and got great people. They were wonderful in my mom. With one exception, they're all women. And fortunately, my brothers and sisters have done better than I have. And we were able to all chip in and make sure everything was paid. But it was very expensive. Those of you who are doing the same thing with your families, you know that. Well, you know, the take-home, the care of workers, for example, there are nearly 1.8 million home care workers across the country. Hard-working and pretty professional, mostly women, who work around the clock so folks like my mom get help bathing, cooking, keeping track of their medications, which is a chore by itself, live independently in their own homes, or, in this case, with me not there. Think of all those baby boomers trying to care for their parents, seeking care for themselves. So one of the fastest growing industries, is a good thing in America, is home care. But here's the thing. As the home care business has changed over the years, the law hasn't changed to keep up. In some cases, folks work for large companies that provide these workers. They charge a reasonable price, which is a lot of money, but then turn around and pay less than the minimum wage. Not the outfit I had, best of my knowledge, but they turn around and pay less than the minimum wage for providing service. So this exception that was built in the law 75 years ago, when you go to the next door neighbor and they're helping you out kind of thing, that's not where we are today. So in December 2011, the president made a commitment to guarantee home care workers hired by third-party employers a minimum wage and overtime pay protection. And now we're following through on that promise. Look, the president and I and all the guys and women you met in our team so far, this administration, is now working to finalize the rule that will get this done. Look, it's an example of the basic question of economic growth and fairness. Shouldn't someone working 40 hours a week be able to make a wage that's above the poverty level? I mean, it's not, it's just, It's not dignity. It's not about dignity. It's about decency. I mean, working 40 hours a week. It's just that simple. American workers built this country. The folks behind me and those who went before them built this country. And so we got to continue to support them. The Fair Labor Standards Act is as relevant today as it was the day it was passed. And this is worth the fight. And looking out at all of you, I'm confident we have the better side of the argument and the better side of the Army on our side. And so, folks, we are determined. It's wages, it's overtime, and it is decency, and it's about, at the end of the day, as Gene said, and his book does focus on, the whole notion of dignity. Just simple dignity. No man or woman who works 40 hours a week should go home and look at their kids and say, honey, we got to apply for food stamps. We got to apply for this particular help or that particular help. No one wants to have to do that. Nobody wants to do that. Want to make it on their own. And folks, that's all this is about, a fighting chance. So God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you so much.